10 years ago, in the depths of the Pisgah National Forest, Natalie came face to face with Jonathan Pierce, and despite doing everything right, he escaped, leaving behind ruined lives and a wound that never closed. She carried his crimes with her for a decade, every act of cruelty etched into memory, until a single report resurfaced his name, and in that instant she claimed the mission as her own, knowing it would end only one way. When her team finally cornered Jonathan in the Olympic National Forest, he laughed, certain she was still the woman who had hesitated before. But Natalie didn't raise her voice or flinch. She took one of his fingers, not for vengeance, but as a message, a quiet declaration of who she had become. Jonathan was arrested, yet even in chains, his reach lingered, a larger scheme already in motion, designed to keep spreading harm without him. And standing amid the aftermath, Natalie made a silent promise to erase every last trace of what he had built. If this feels like only the surface, you're right. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Then stay with us as we unravel how this story truly began and why stopping it demanded everything she was willing to give.
The rain in the Olympic National Forest fell in dense sheets, flattening fern fronds and turning the forest floor into a slick lattice of mud, needles, and rotting leaves. Sound died quickly here. Water swallowed it. That was why Lieutenant Commander Natalie Collins had chosen this approach vector. Her boots rolled heel to toe with controlled pressure. Each step placed where moss was thickest, where branches wouldn't snap under load. Her breathing stayed low and metered, 4 count in, 4 count out. The cadence locked into muscle memory long before conscious thought. Her body registered the cold only as data. Skin temperature suppressed beneath layered insulation, pulse steady, hands dry inside textured gloves. The forest smelled of wet bark and iron-rich soil. Somewhere far off, a raven called once and went silent. 10 years had compressed into this moment. Not memory calculation. Coordinates, angles, distances. Natalie's eyes tracked through the trees, cataloging dead space, shadow pockets. The subtle, unnatural geometry that betrayed a man-made structure ahead. The cabin sat just below the timberline, smoke venting lazily from a crooked stovepipe. No exterior lights, no dogs, no perimeter alarms she could see. That absence itself was information. Behind her, the team flowed into position without a word. A collapsing perimeter, sectors overlapping, weapons held at a low ready that never wavered. Their movement had the quiet inevitability of machinery. Natalie felt them more than she saw them, pressure at her back, coverage to her flanks. She raised 2 fingers. The line halted. A clenched fist followed. Freeze. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, then released. Pisgah had done that to her. The habit of locking down before action. She exhaled through her nose and advanced alone the final meters. The cabin door was old pine, swollen from years of moisture. Hinges rusted, frame warped, no barricade. He wanted to be found. Natalie didn't breach gently. Her boot struck just below the latch, driving through softened wood. The door blew inward with a sharp crack, slamming against the wall hard enough to rattle loose a cascade of dust and soot. Heat hit her first, then light. Jonathan Pierce sat at a rough table near the stove, a glass of whiskey cupped loosely in his right hand. The amber liquid trembled but didn't spill. His eyes lifted slowly, unhurried, tracking the red laser dots that bloomed across his chest like a constellation. He didn't reach for the pistol holstered at his hip. He didn't move at all. A smile crept across his face, thin and knowing. One corner of his mouth lifted higher than the other. A familiar asymmetry. Natalie registered it without reacting. Her fingers stayed indexed along the frame of her rifle, safety engaged. She stepped inside, clearing left, then right. The room was bare. Table. 2 chairs? A cot? No immediate threats. Jonathan's gaze fixed on her. His eyes flicked briefly to the insignia on her shoulder, then back to her face. His chuckle started in his chest and escaped through his nose, low and dismissive. The sound scraped against her eardrums. 10 years ago, that sound had frozen her for half a heartbeat. Not now. Natalie's rifle came down. She didn't issue commands. Her lips didn't move. She slung the weapon and closed the distance in 2 strides, boots thudding softly against warped floorboards. Jonathan's smile faltered just enough. His pupils dilated. He started to shift back in his chair. Too slow. Her left hand clamped down on his wrist, tendons standing out beneath her glove as she torqued his arm across the table. The wood groaned under the sudden force. Jonathan inhaled sharply, breath catching as pain flared through his shoulder. His whiskey glass shattered against the floor. Natalie's right hand came up with the knife already deployed. Serrated spine, edge honed to a surgical finish. No flourish, no hesitation. She pressed his index finger flat against the table, feeling the vibration in the bone as he struggled, feeling the heat of his skin through the glove. The blade went down once. The resistance was brief. Cartilage gave way with a wet snap. Blood followed immediately, dark and arterial, pooling across the grain of the wood. Jonathan's scream tore out of him, raw and involuntary, the sound of a body realizing what had been taken. His face drained of color. His free hand clawed uselessly at the table as his chair scraped backward. Natalie leaned in close enough that he could smell the rain on her gear, the oil on her blade. Her eyes were steady, unblinking. Her voice didn't rise. "That was for the hesitation," she said, flat, controlled. "Now you know who stands before you." He sagged, shock setting in, breath coming in ragged pulls. A medic moved in from the doorway, already tearing open a field dressing, hands efficient as he compressed the wound and wrapped it tight. Jonathan's laughter was gone. His eyes darted wildly, then fixed on the digital clock mounted above the stove. Something shifted behind the fear. Calculation returned. "You're too late, Collins," he rasped, swallowing hard as pain cut through the drugs already flooding his system. His lips trembled, then curved into something like satisfaction. "The sequence. It's already initiated. Taking me doesn't stop the shipment." Natalie straightened. The knife disappeared back into its sheath. For the first time since entering the cabin, she felt the weight of the room settle around her. Not dread, not panic, but the familiar narrowing of focus that came when a mission mutated. Her eyes lifted to the clock as well. The forest outside kept raining. The extraction helicopter cut through the mist like a blunt instrument, its rotors beating the air into submission. Moisture condensed along the open door frame and streamed backward in thin, vibrating lines. Inside the cabin, everything shook metal, webbing, bone. The sound was constant, invasive, a pressure that lived inside the skull rather than the ears. Jonathan Pierce lay strapped to the litter, wrists secured, torso cinched tight. A clear oxygen mask fogged with each shallow breath. His left hand was heavily wrapped, crimson already seeping through the gauze in uneven blooms. The sedative kept his body compliant, but his jaw twitched intermittently, a reflex the drugs hadn't fully suppressed. Natalie Collins sat opposite him, boots planted wide for balance, knees absorbing the vibration. Her helmet rested against the bulkhead beside her. She held her knife loosely, turning it just enough to catch the dull cabin light as she wiped the blade clean with a sterile cloth. The motion was precise, habitual. Blood came away in dark streaks, then faded to pink, then nothing. The rotor vibration crept upward through the deck and into her spine. It slipped past conscious defenses and brushed against a place she normally kept sealed. Pisgah National Forest, 2016. Different trees. Same rain. They had been ghosts that night. 4 operators moving through terrain that funneled sound and light in all the wrong ways. The mission was reconnaissance. Nothing more. Eyes on. Confirm movement. Exfiltrate clean. Jonathan Pierce hadn't been listed as anything more than a facilitator, a man who spoke in numbers and keys, who never touched the weapons his deals enabled. The first explosion rewrote the night. Natalie remembered the concussive force lifting her chest, the way the ground seemed to breathe outward. Shrapnel cut through brush and flesh alike. The civilian family had been too close to the trail marker to see the tripwire before it vanished underfoot. 2 adults, 1 adolescent. Screams arrived half a second after the blast, sharp and disordered. She had Jonathan in her optic then. Clear sight picture. Center mass. He stood on a ridgeline, calm, binoculars raised, watching the chaos unfold with professional interest. A second device detonated farther down the trail, sealing the kill corridor. Command traffic flooded her headset. Conflicting priorities. Fragmented data. Natalie's finger tightened on the trigger. Her breathing stalled at the top of the cycle. Through the scope, Jonathan lowered the binoculars and looked directly at her position. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He lifted one hand in a slow, deliberate salute, fingers crisp, mocking in its correctness. Then he stepped backward into the trees and was gone. She broke contact and moved to the civilians. Training shifted tracks without conscious input. Tourniquets, airway, pressure. The father's femoral artery had been shredded. The mother's leg was gone below the knee. The adolescent was in shock, pupils blown wide, hands slick with blood that wasn't entirely his. Natalie stayed with them until evacuation arrived. She didn't look back toward the ridge. The debrief afterward had been clinical. Words like missed opportunity and failure to neutralize were used without heat. The cost came later. A promotion stalled. A command quietly reassigned. Her record annotated with restraint, dressed up as hesitation. The helicopter lurched slightly as it banked, pulling her back into the present. Natalie finished cleaning the blade and slid it home. She didn't look at Jonathan as she secured the sheath. Her shoulders rose and fell once, measured, then settled. Across from her, the flight medic glanced up from the monitor clipped to Jonathan's litter. He raised 2 fingers and pointed at his own eyes, then at Jonathan. Regaining consciousness. Natalie nodded and reached for the comms lead, snapping it into her helmet port. Static flared, then resolved into layered voices and data. Fragmented intelligence, half-confirmed reports. Asset movement flagged across multiple nodes. Shipping manifests spiking in activity. No narcotic signatures. No currency trails. Volatile. Jonathan stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened fully. His pupils constricted against the cabin light. For a moment, confusion smoothed his features. Then his gaze found his bandaged hand. His breath hitched, sharp and involuntary. A muscle jumped along his cheek as he clenched his jaw. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto Natalie. Even sedated, the defiance was there, buried but intact. "You think mutilation makes you a winner?" His voice was thin under the headset feed, strained but clear enough. He swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. "The train left the station an hour ago. And you're on the wrong continent to stop it." Natalie met his gaze without expression. One gloved hand tightened briefly around the edge of her seat, then relaxed. Her eyes flicked to the monitor, to the steady rhythm of his heart rate, then back to his face. The helicopter pressed forward into the mist, carrying them toward a place that didn't exist on maps. While behind them, the forest closed in on itself, indifferent. The helicopter settled onto the pad with a controlled shudder, rotor wash flattening the surrounding brush and sending grit skittering across the tarmac. Floodlights cut through the lingering mist, bleaching the night into stark plains of light and shadow. Natalie dismounted before the blades slowed, boots striking painted concrete already stained by years of oil and hydraulic fluid. Her posture never shifted as Jonathan was unloaded behind her, still restrained, still breathing through the mask. The forward operating base was functional to the point of austerity. No insignia beyond what was required. No windows where they weren't necessary. Corridors designed to move people quickly and leave no impressions. Natalie led the transfer herself, pace unhurried, eyes forward. Jonathan's litter wheels rattled softly over seams in the floor. The interrogation room waited at the end of a narrow passage. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss and sealed again just as cleanly behind them. Cold lived in the room. Bare concrete walls, poured thick and unfinished, held the chill without apology. The floor sloped subtly toward a circular drain at the center, its metal grate darkened by use. No chair, no table. No fixtures that could be repurposed. Light came from a single recessed panel in the ceiling, harsh and direct. Jonathan was brought upright and released from the litter. His knees buckled for a fraction of a second before he caught himself against the wall, shoulder scraping concrete. The medic stepped back without a word. The door closed. Locks engaged with a dull, final sound. Natalie entered alone. She carried a ruggedized tablet under her arm, casing scarred and dulled from field use. She didn't acknowledge Jonathan immediately. Instead, she moved a few steps into the room, boots echoing once, then stopping. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp stone. Jonathan lifted his head. Sweat traced a line down his temple, collecting at the edge of his jaw. His breathing was uneven, the sedative wearing thin. His wrapped hand twitched once, fingers curling reflexively against the bandage. Natalie turned then. Her face gave him nothing. "We encrypted your phone, Jonathan," she said, voice level, uninflected. "Full spectrum. But encryption only holds until it meets the right key." She brought the tablet up and activated the screen. The glow cut across her features, highlighting the stillness in her eyes. She stepped closer, just inside his personal space, and angled the display so he could see. "Biometric authentication," she continued. "Turns out I didn't take your finger for revenge. I took it for the fingerprint scanner." Her thumb tapped the screen once. Folders unfolded in clean hierarchies. Encrypted partitions resolved into readable directories. Transaction logs scrolled past, schematics, routing tables. Jonathan's reaction was immediate and involuntary. Color drained from his face in a slow wave, leaving his skin gray and slick. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His gaze flicked across the data, faster and faster, pupils tightening as recognition set in. A muscle jumped beneath his left eye, betraying the effort it took to remain upright. It wasn't pain that hollowed him. It was comprehension. Natalie watched without satisfaction. She scrolled with 2 fingers, precise, controlled. "Autonomous drone swarms," she said. "Unregistered variants. Military grade. Stolen from a DARPA contractor under a shell procurement program." She paused on a manifest file and expanded it. Declared as medical supplies. Temperature-controlled shipping. Plausible humanitarian cover. Her fingers slid to the destination field. Eastern Europe. Conflict adjacent. Sanitized routing. Then she highlighted the deviation. A secondary waypoint. Domestic. "A port in Seattle," Natalie said quietly. "This isn't a sale." Jonathan's shoulders sagged. His back met the wall fully now, concrete biting through his shirt. Sweat beaded along his upper lip. He drew a breath through his nose and let it out in a thin, shaking line. "It's a false flag," Natalie went on, eyes never leaving the screen. "You're not selling them. You're deploying them. Here." Jonathan laughed once, a dry, broken sound that ended in a cough. He turned his head away, forehead pressing briefly to the wall as if the cold might steady him. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. "You can't stop the algorithm," he said. His chest rose and fell faster now. "They're coded to activate on container breach. Customs opens that crate, even a centimeter, and the swarm goes live." Natalie looked up from the tablet. "Targeting protocol?" she asked. Jonathan swallowed. His eyes slid back to hers, defiance eroded into something sharper and more desperate. "Heat signatures," he said. 5-mile radius. Adaptive acquisition." Downtown Seattle filled the space between them without being named. Natalie's jaw set. She turned the tablet sideways and checked the metadata, timestamps aligning with shipping logs and inspection schedules. Her thumb hovered for a fraction of a second before stopping. 40 minutes. She locked the screen and lowered the device. The room seemed smaller then, the air heavier, as if time itself had condensed. Jonathan watched her face for a crack, a flicker, anything. He found none. Her eyes went to the drain in the floor, then back to him, already moving past the moment and into calculation. The clock was running. Natalie broke into a run the moment she cleared the interrogation corridor. Her boots struck the polished concrete in clipped, efficient strides, arms tight to her sides to conserve motion. Personnel stepped aside without being told, reading the intent in her posture and the set of her shoulders. Screz, a red indicator above the tactical operations center door flashed as she approached, recognizing her clearance and cycling open. "Get me the Port Authority. Now. Code Black." Her voice cut through the room before the door finished sealing behind her. The talk responded instantly. Chairs scraped back. Screens multiplied across the main wall, feeds blooming to life in layered grids. Analysts moved without eye contact, hands already flying over keyboards. The ambient noise shifted. No shouting, no panic, just the low, continuous hum of focused activity. Satellite imagery locked onto the Port of Seattle. Container stacks filled the displays, endless rows of steel rectangles piled with mechanical precision. Identification numbers scrolled beneath them in rapid succession. Heat maps overlaid the scene, false color bleeding into the cold blue of Puget Sound. Natalie moved to the center console. She planted both hands on its edge, knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. Her eyes tracked the feeds, absorbing scale and density in a single sweep. "Jonathan's data gives us a sector, not a grid," an analyst reported, jaw tight as he enlarged a subsection of the yard. "That's over 9,000 containers." 40 minutes ticked in Natalie's peripheral vision, counting down in red numerals. "We need a localized jammer," she said. "Kill the frequency the drones use to communicate." A beat passed, half a second too long. "Commander," the communications specialist said, leaning forward, fingers hovering over his console. His lips pressed together before he spoke again. "The frequency. It's military band. Ours. If we jam it, we blind every flight controller and emergency responder in the city. FAA traffic. Coast Guard. EMS. Everything." Natalie's jaw tightened. Her gaze stayed on the screen, but her reflection stared back at her from the glass eyes narrowed. Breathing shallow and controlled. Jonathan hadn't just built a weapon. He had engineered a dilemma. Pisgah rose unbidden, not as memory, but as sensation. The pause, the choice, the cost. She exhaled slowly through her nose. "We don't jam it," Natalie said. Her voice dropped, flattening, stripping away any trace of doubt. "We hijack it." Heads turned toward her. The comms specialist blinked once, then nodded, already recalculating. Fingers moved faster now, rerouting pathways, mapping signal architecture. Natalie reached for a headset and slid it over one ear. Her other hand tapped a command into the console, pulling up the live feed from the interrogation room. Jonathan Pierce filled the screen, slumped against concrete, bandaged hand cradled against his chest. He was smiling, not wide, not triumphant, just enough to be unmistakable. His eyes tracked the camera with lazy precision. He knew she was watching. He knew the clock. Natalie's lips pressed together for a fraction of a second. She keyed the mic. "Jonathan." His smile widened by a millimeter. A tick fluttered at the corner of his eye. "I'm not asking for the override code," Natalie continued, voice even, unhurried. "I'm informing you that I just authorized a transfer. We're moving you." Jonathan's head tilted slightly, curiosity edging into his expression. "To where?" he asked, the sneer creeping back into his tone despite the strain underneath. Natalie didn't look away from the screen as she answered. "To the container yard," she said. "If those drones activate, you'll be the first heat signature they acquire." The smile vanished. Jonathan's breath caught, just briefly. His shoulders shifted against the wall, muscles tightening as if already bracing for impact. His gaze flicked off camera, calculating distances he couldn't see, outcomes he could. Natalie held his eyes through the screen, unblinking. She didn't threaten. She stated. Behind her, the talk continued to move, signals rerouting, plans forming under pressure, measured in seconds. The port filled the displays, vast and indifferent, steel stacked upon steel. Natalie reached up and adjusted the headset, sealing it fully over her ear. Her fist closed once at her side, then opened again. The bluff was set. The biometric monitor beside Jonathan's feed told the first truth. His heart rate spiked sharply, a clean jump that cut through the steady baseline like a blade. The line trembled, then tried to settle. His jaw tightened. The muscles along his neck stood out in stark relief as he drew a breath through clenched teeth. "You won't do it," he said, forcing the words out evenly. The sneer was thinner now, stretched tight over calculation. "You're a SEAL, not a murderer." Natalie didn't look at the monitor when she answered. Her gaze stayed on Jonathan's face, on the way his eyes kept flicking toward the edges of the frame, measuring distances that didn't exist. "I'm a soldier who learns from her mistakes," she said. Her thumb moved once along the edge of the console, a small, deliberate motion. Somewhere beyond the talk walls, a checklist advanced. Fuel pumps engaged. Rotor blades began to turn. The sound came through the feed a moment later, low at first, then unmistakable. The steady, rising thrum of a helicopter spooling up. Jonathan's breath stuttered. His eyes widened a fraction before he forced them narrow again. The bandaged hand twitched against his chest, fingers curling reflexively as if searching for leverage. He said nothing, but the monitor betrayed him. The heart rate climbed again, faster this time. Natalie let the sound sit there. She didn't embellish it. She didn't threaten further. Pressure applied and sustained. Behind her, Chief Miller leaned closer to his workstation, eyes narrowed at a secondary data stream he'd pulled up in parallel. His fingers paused, then moved again, slower now, tracing connections rather than skimming them. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low. "Look at this." Natalie turned her head slightly, enough to give him her attention without breaking the line of sight to Jonathan's feed. "The payment trail on Pierce's drive," Miller continued. He expanded a set of financial records onto his screen, columns of numbers resolving into corporate identifiers and routing paths. "The buyer isn't foreign. These funds originated from a domestic shell." He highlighted the node, Virginia. Natalie's stillness deepened. Her shoulders remained squared, but a subtle tension crept into her posture, as if a load had shifted internally. Her lips pressed together once, then relaxed. Virginia. The implications arranged themselves without effort. Langley. The Pentagon. Oversight committees and classified inventories that never fully balanced. This wasn't a rogue operation spun out of ideology or profit alone. This was housekeeping. Jonathan wasn't the architect. He was the solvent. "This goes higher than Pierce," Natalie said quietly. The words weren't for the room so much as for herself. "He's just the cleaner." Jonathan watched her from the screen, reading what he could from her face. A faint smile tried to return, faltered, then disappeared altogether. Miller was already pulling more threads, hands moving faster as the picture widened. Then every screen in the talk went black at once. The hum of the room cut off mid-note. Keyboards went dead under waiting fingers. The satellite feeds vanished, replaced by empty darkness that reflected the operators back at themselves. "We've been locked out," Miller said sharply. He stabbed at his controls, then looked up, jaw set. "Administrative override from DC. They're scrubbing the mission. We've been ordered to stand down. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy and final in their phrasing. A lawful order. Proper channels. Clean signatures. On the monitor mounted above the now dark wall, Jonathan's feed froze for half a second before cutting entirely. His last expression, eyes alight with vindication, burned into the empty screen. The scheme he'd bragged about wasn't just the drones. It was this. The kill switch no one talked about, buried under layers of protocol and authority. Capture the asset, trigger the lockout, let the clock finish the work. Natalie reached up and pulled the headset from her ear in one smooth motion. The plastic flexed slightly under the force before she dropped it onto the console. It landed with a dull clack. "Ignore the order," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't sharpen. It settled, low and immovable. "We are dark." Miller swallowed once, then nodded, already shifting modes. "I can try to trace the container's thermal output manually," he said. "Residual heat, refrigeration cycles. But without satellite support, we're flying blind," Natalie finished. She checked her sidearm without looking down, muscle memory guiding the motion. The weight was familiar, grounding. The weapon locked back into its holster with a soft, decisive sound. "Then we do it the old-fashioned way," she said. "We get eyes on." For a moment, no one spoke. The talk existed in a liminal space, cut off, unauthorized, operating on borrowed seconds. Natalie straightened, already turning toward the exit. Her stride was measured, controlled, every movement stripped down to necessity. Behind her, systems rebooted into quieter configurations, working without permission now, without safety nets. Somewhere in the distance, rotor noise deepened. Ready. The flight to the port unfolded at treetop altitude, the helicopters skimming over dark water and industrial sprawl with practiced aggression. Natalie remained anchored near the open door, one gloved hand gripping the frame, her eyes fixed on the approaching grid of cranes and stacked containers. The rotor wash battered her senses, a constant vibration that traveled through bone and muscle. Familiar enough to register without thought. Below them, the port of Seattle spread out in rigid geometry order, masking vulnerability. The pilot flared hard. Natalie didn't look back. At her signal, the rope dropped. She went first. The fast rope burned against her gloves as she slid, boots striking steel with a dull thud. She absorbed the impact through bent knees, rolling into a low crouch atop a refrigerated container stacked 3 high. The rest of her form and element followed in tight sequence, spacing clean, no wasted motion. Wind coming off Puget Sound cut through their layers, sharp and wet, carrying the metallic tongue of salt and fuel. They were invisible from the ground if no one looked up. Miller's voice came through the localized squad radio, compressed and controlled. "Sector 4 confirmed. Target container is somewhere in this row. Look for a refrigerated unit that isn't running. Batteries need cold storage, but not active cooling." Natalie scanned the line. Condensation streaks marked active reefers, faint vibrations visible through pooled rainwater. One unit stood out silent, dry, its power cable coiled but unplugged. Her jaw set by a fraction. They moved laterally across the containers, spacing precise, muzzles tracking angles of approach. Below them, customs agents moved between lanes, unaware. Hard hats, clipboards, radios. Every step Natalie took carried the weight of that fact. Any mistake here would turn civilians into collateral. Her left eye twitched once as she dropped to a knee near the silent container, fingers brushing the seal. Intact. No breach marks. "Contact," the point man breathed. The word barely disturbed the air. 3 hostiles, not customs, military kit, no insignia. Natalie didn't turn her head. Her fist tightened once, knuckles whitening beneath the glove, then relaxed. Mercenaries. Jonathan's contingency. She had expected them. They were positioned too well to be coincidence, one near the container door, 2 covering lanes below. Rifles held low, discipline evident, cleanup crew waiting to make sure the narrative ended in fire and confusion. Natalie lifted 2 fingers, then closed her hand. Silence. Gunfire was not an option. A single stray round into the container wall could breach insulation, trip the internal sensors, or worse, trigger the swarm. This had to be controlled down to breath and pulse. Knife work. Holds. No noise. She shifted her weight forward and dropped. The descent was short. She landed behind the nearest sentry, boots touching asphalt without scrape. He sensed movement, shoulders starting to turn. Natalie was already inside his space. Her forearm slid under his chin, pressure precise against the carotid. Her other hand locked the hold, wrist firm, elbow tight. His hands clawed once at her sleeve, fingers trembling, then strength drained out of him. She eased him down, letting his body settle without impact. 6 seconds. To her left, a shadow moved and stilled. To her right, another. No shots, no raised voices, just controlled breathing over coms. Each operator confirming neutralization with a single click. Natalie stepped back toward the container, pulse steady, senses sharpened. She crouched at the lock, rain beating on the metal. That was when she saw it. A small LED embedded near the digital seal. Blinking. Her breath caught, not a gasp, just a pause between inhale and exhale. 2 beats, 3. The rhythm of the blink was steady, deliberate, armed. She leaned closer, reading the microdisplay. Red numerals, counting down. Her jaw tightened. The muscles along her neck flexed as she lifted her wrist, shielding the light with her body. "It's armed," she whispered into the mic. Her voice stayed level, but her fingers curled slowly into a fist. "Active timer." Miller's reply came a half-second later, sharper now. "Confirm." Natalie angled the display just enough for her helmet cam to catch it. The numbers kept moving. 1 minute 55, she added. Not urgency. Information. The port noises continued around them. Diesel engines, distant horns, shouted instructions, unaware that a clock had started ticking above their heads. Natalie straightened, eyes sweeping the perimeter once more. No room for hesitation. No margin for error. The choice she'd made years ago pressed at the edges of her thoughts, but she locked it down, the way she always did. Focus first. Reckoning later. Rain hammered down on the container yard in hard, slanted sheets, drumming against steel and asphalt with mechanical persistence. Sodium lights cast everything in a dull amber wash, reflections stretching and breaking beneath Natalie's boots as she knelt beside the container door. Miller was already at the locking mechanism. Water streamed off his helmet and ran down the sleeves of his jacket as he wiped the panel with the edge of his glove. The seal was intact, no pry marks, no fractures. Too clean. "It's a tamper-proof digital seal," he said, leaning in close, voice clipped and fast. His fingers hovered just short of the interface. Independent power source. "If I cut it, it triggers. If I enter the wrong code, it triggers." A red countdown glowed through the translucent casing. The numbers dropped with patient precision. Natalie shifted closer, her body angling instinctively to shield the keypad from the rain. Droplets ran down her forearm and gathered at her wrist, darkening the fabric of her sleeve. Her jaw tightened as she studied the interface. "Use the finger data," she said. Miller's mouth pulled into a thin line. "Already did. It's 2-factor. Biometric plus a passphrase." The timer ticked down another second. Natalie reached up and tapped her coms, thumbs steady despite the cold creeping into her hands. The channel opened with a faint burst of static. "Patch me through to the holding cells," she said. "Now." A beat. Then her XO's voice came through, tight but controlled. "He's here! Do you want him on?" "Yes." A moment later, Jonathan's breathing filled the channel. Too loud. too close. He sounded like a man leaning into the microphone. "Jonathan," Natalie said. The timer's steady pulse was audible behind her words, a muted electronic click that carried over the open line. "I'm standing at the door." She didn't raise her voice. "She didn't rush. You had mercenaries here," she continued. "They're dead. Your cleanup crew failed." Miller's eyes flicked to her for half a second, then back to the lock. His knuckles whitened as his hands curled briefly into fists, then flattened again against the casing. "Give me the passphrase," Natalie said, "or I open this door and let the world see what you built." For a heartbeat, there was nothing but Jonathan's breathing. Then, he laughed. It came out sharp and brittle, pitched too high, the sound fraying at the edges. "It doesn't matter," he said, laughter hitching between the words. "You're already too late." The timer dropped another number. "The passphrase is Pisgah," Jonathan went on. "Type it in, see what happens." Natalie's eyes stayed on the lock, but something passed over her face quick, involuntary. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together. The rain traced a line down from her hairline to her cheek and fell away. It was too easy. "Don't do it, boss," Miller said quietly. He didn't look at her this time. His gaze was fixed on the blinking digits. "That's an emotional trigger. He wants you to type it." Natalie closed her eyes. For a fraction of a second, the yard disappeared. In its place, file directories and naming conventions aligned themselves in her mind, the structure she had studied earlier under fluorescent light. Jonathan's habits, his vanity, the way he framed his own narrative. Pisgah had been a victory, a massacre he never stopped claiming as inevitability. But it wasn't his greatest one. Her breathing slowed. When she opened her eyes again, they were steady. "Try Yemen," she said. Miller looked at her then. Really looked. Rain ran down his face, collecting at the edge of his chin before dropping away. He hesitated just long enough for the timer to shed another second. Then he nodded. His fingers moved. YEMEN. The panel went still. The red light blinked once, then shifted to green. A muted mechanical click sounded from inside the door, followed by the deeper thunk of internal bolts retracting. The countdown froze. 8 seconds. Miller let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shoulders sagged a fraction before he caught himself and stepped back. Natalie reached for the handle and pulled. The door swung open on heavy hinges, releasing a wave of cold, stagnant air that smelled faintly of oil and insulation. Inside, the container was lit by emergency strips running along the ceiling, their glows stark and clinical. Rows of drones sat secured in reinforced cradles, wings folded, optics dark. Autonomous units, dormant, silent. In the center of the container, wired directly into the explosives rig, was something else. A woman. She was bound to a steel chair bolted to the container floor, wrists cinched tight, ankles secured. A gag cut into the corners of her mouth, damp with condensation. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Her eyes were wide, tracking the sudden light, the movement at the door. Natalie didn't move. Her hand tightened slowly around the doorframe, leather creaking under the pressure. Somewhere behind her, Miller swore under his breath, the word clipped and sharp. Natalie stepped inside. She recognized the woman immediately. The posture? Even restrained. The face she had seen on secure briefings and framed photographs in restricted corridors. The wife of the general who had signed her stand-down order. Natalie's gaze lifted, distant now, already tracing the invisible line back to Washington, to Virginia, to the signature that had tried to end this before it could be seen. Rain continued to fall outside the container, steady and indifferent. The realization struck with the force of a blunt impact, not dramatic, not explosive, but absolute. Natalie's jaw tightened, a fine muscle jumping once beneath her cheekbone as the implications aligned in her mind with clinical clarity. This was never about Seattle, never about mass casualties or ideology. The drones were leverage, nothing more precision tools meant to erase a problem quietly. A four-star general, cornered into obedience by the threat of his wife dying in a container wired to look like terrorism. Jonathan hadn't been a zealot. He had been a broker, facilitating a controlled collapse inside the defense apparatus, hiding an assassination behind acronyms and plausible deniability. The woman lay rigid on the container floor, wrists bound with polymer restraints, tape cutting into the corners of her mouth. Her chest rose in short, shallow increments, each breath stopping just shy of panic. Natalie knelt beside her, boots planted carefully to avoid any vibration. A pressure plate sat beneath the woman's back, its indicator light steady but unforgiving. "Steady," Natalie said. Her voice shifted without effort, dropping into a cadence shaped by years of triage tents and extraction birds, low and even, designed to bypass fear rather than confront it. "I need you to not move." The woman's eyes flicked toward Natalie, glassy and unfocused, then locked there as if holding on was the only thing keeping her anchored to the floor. A tear slid sideways into her hairline. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She breathed when Natalie breathed. Behind them, rain hammered the container roof, each impact sharp and metallic. Miller's hands hovered over the exposed wiring, fingers flexing once, twice, then still. His lower lip pressed inward as he tracked the circuit paths feeding the explosives. He said nothing. The point man shifted near the container doors, weapon angled down but ready. His head tilted slightly, listening. "We have company," he said, barely louder than the rain. "Vehicles approaching. Armored SUVs. It's the extraction team for the mercenaries. They think the drones are active." Natalie's eyes moved to the open yard beyond the bluff, taking in distances and dead ground in a single sweep. Water to their backs, limited cover, no clean exfiltration window. The general's wife could not be moved without triggering the plate. Running was not an option. Her left hand closed slowly, knuckles whitening inside her glove. "Miller," Natalie said, not turning. "Rearm the drones." Miller's head snapped up. "What?" "Reprogram the target parameters. Set them to defensive mode. Target hostile weapons fire only." A muscle ticked near Miller's eye as he processed the order. Rain streaked down his face, cutting through the grime. "That's highly risky, Commander." His fingers hovered again, hesitating over the control tablet. Autonomous systems were never meant to improvise in close quarters, not with friendlies inside the engagement envelope. Natalie finally looked at him. Her expression didn't harden, it settled. "Do it." Miller exhaled through his nose, sharp and contained, then brought the tablet up, thumbs moving with precise, economical taps, code scrolled. Safeties peeled back one layer at a time. Somewhere inside the container, a soft electronic whine answered, low and rising as dormant systems woke. Outside, engines roared closer, tires biting into wet gravel. Headlights cut through the rain as the SUVs skidded to a halt. Doors flew open. Heavily armed men spilled out, weapons up, muzzles searching. They moved with confidence born of expectation, not caution. They believed the drones were theirs. Natalie stood in one smooth motion, drawing herself between the woman and the open doors. She reached out and kicked the container doors wide, metal slamming against their stops, exposing the interior to the floodlights and the rain. "Miller," she said, voice carrying now, clear and final. "Execute." Inside the container, the drones lifted from their racks in perfect unison, rotors spinning up into a controlled scream, weapons systems tracking as parameters locked in. Natalie didn't flinch. She kept her eyes forward, breathing measured. One hand raised slightly behind her, steady. "Stay still," while the air around them began to hum with imminent force. The swarm activated. The air filled with a dense, vibrating hum, layered and aggressive, a sound that pressed against the eardrums and set teeth on edge. The drones rose and spread with algorithmic precision, their rotors synchronizing into a single, relentless frequency. It wasn't loud in the way explosions were loud. It was invasive, impossible to ignore. The mercenaries reacted on instinct. Rifles came up. Fingers tightened on triggers. In that instant, the threat detection suite finalized its assessment. The drones did not fire, they surged. Units dove low and fast, slamming into rifle receivers with enough force to shear optics from rails. Others wedged themselves into barrel lines, rotors screaming as they jammed moving parts, forcing bolts out of alignment. Several swarmed faces and sight lines, deliberately clouding vision, disrupting depth perception, forcing the men to flinch and recoil. It was chaos, but it was not random. Every movement served denial of aim, of coordination, of control. Shouts broke through the mechanical buzz. A weapon clattered to the ground. One man stumbled backward, hands up around his face, eyes squeezed shut as a drone skated across his cheek and tore away. Another tried to swat one aside and caught a spinning blade across his knuckles, blood flicking into the rain. Natalie moved the moment the line fractured. Her rifle came up, stock tight into her shoulder, cheek welded, breath held just long enough to steady the reticle. Controlled bursts cracked through the storm, short, disciplined, terminal. Her team flowed with her, angles overlapping, sectors collapsing inward as they advanced. There was no shouting, no wasted motion. Each SEAL read the others through posture and position, stepping into gaps without breaking cadence. The mercenaries were still fighting the swarm when the first of them went down. Natalie shifted targets, tracking a man trying to clear a jammed barrel, a micro-adjustment of her wrist. 2 rounds. He folded. Another dropped as a teammate cut across her field, firing through an opening the drones had forced. Tactical dominance asserted itself not through speed, but inevitability. Within seconds, resistance collapsed. Bodies lay sprawled in the wet gravel, weapons disabled, hands bound were necessary. The hum of the swarm soft, tapering as threat indicators went cold. Natalie turned back toward the container. The general's wife was crouched inside, wrapped in a field jacket, shoulders shaking now that the pressure plate had been neutralized. Her hands were free, but she clutched them together as if still bound. Natalie knelt briefly, checked pupils, pulse at the wrist, fast but steady, then rose and keyed her radio. "VIP secure," she said. Her voice was even, but her jaw stayed set. "Request immediate extraction." The reply was barely acknowledged before her pocket vibrated. She didn't look surprised when she saw the caller ID. "Commander Collins," the general said. His voice came through the line, thin, brittle, the authority stripped away by strain. "You are in violation of direct orders." Natalie turned slightly, putting the container wall between herself and the woman. Rain streaked down her helmet. She listened without interrupting, then answered. "General," she said. Her gaze settled briefly on the woman behind her, eyes red, breath hitching, alive. "I secured the package, and I have the hard drive proving you are being leveraged. You can either resign with dignity, or I can let the JAG Corps listen to this recording." Her thumb hovered over the screen, resting just above the file icon. She didn't press it. Silence stretched, long enough for the rain to fill the gap, long enough for the general to breathe, once audibly, before speaking again. "Bring her home," he whispered. Natalie ended the call without ceremony. Back at the base, Jonathan sat alone in his holding cell, wrists cuffed to the bench. A muted television bolted high on the wall played the news feed. No fireball, no screaming Chiron, just a clipped report about a smuggling attempt intercepted offshore, suspects detained. He watched without blinking, jaw slack, the reflection of the screen flickering across his face. The hum never came. The explosion never followed. His gaze drifted to the concrete wall and stayed there. Later, the cell door opened. Natalie stepped inside, boots stopping just short of the bench. She carried no weapon in her hands, only a thin folder. Jonathan looked up, a tick jumping once at the corner of his eye. His remaining fingers curled unconsciously, then stilled. She placed a photograph on the metal surface between them. Jonathan leaned forward despite himself. Offshore accounts, routing numbers, balances, zeroed. His breath caught, sharp and involuntary. Asset forfeiture, Natalie said. Her tone was flat, procedural, proceeds of crime. She met his eyes then, held them. He laughed once, a brittle sound that died in his throat. It's all gone, Jonathan, she continued. You're not a mastermind anymore, you're just a broke inmate with 9 fingers. She turned and left him staring at the photo, hands shaking now. The game finally, irrevocably over. 6 months later, Natalie stood alone in the Pisgah National Forest, at the precise bend in the trail where the past had calcified into memory. The canopy above her had begun to turn. Leaves edged with amber and rust drifted down in slow, erratic paths, brushing her shoulders before settling into the damp earth. The air carried the clean bite of early autumn, sharp enough to clear the lungs on the first breath. She wasn't wearing a uniform. The absence of rank and insignia felt deliberate. Hiking boots, worn but meticulously maintained, pressed into the soil. A weatherproof jacket hung open at the collar. Her hair was tied back, practical, unchanged by time. Only the scar on her hand, thin, pale, permanent, marked her as someone who had never truly left the profession behind. Natalie knelt and reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around a small stone, polished smooth by water and handling. She placed it carefully at the edge of the trail, just beyond the packed dirt, where others might notice without stumbling over it. A marker. Nothing ceremonial, nothing official, just acknowledgement. She stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, her gaze fixed on the ground where it had once all gone wrong. Her breathing slowed on its own, falling into a steady rhythm. The forest offered no judgment, only continuity. The nightmare was over. Jonathan's network had been dismantled piece by piece, methodically, without press conferences or grand statements. Shell companies collapsed under forensic audits. Illicit contracts vanished into evidence lockers. Careers ended quietly. A system that had tried to seal itself shut had been forced reluctantly, surgically, to correct its own failures. No monuments marked the process. That was the point. Natalie rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her knee with the edge of her hand. Her jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. Closure wasn't a feeling, it was an absence. Her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen without urgency. The message came from her former executive officer, now promoted, the tone concise in the way operational communications always were. New intel. High-value target in the Sudan. Requires a specialized team leader. Natalie lifted her eyes from the phone and looked down the trail. Sunlight filtered through the branches in broken patterns, dappling the ground ahead. For a moment, the forest was just a forest. No ghosts, no echoes of gunfire, no weight on her back. Her thumb traced the edge of the scar on her hand, the skin there numb in a way that never fully resolved. A reminder, not of pain, but of cost. She typed her reply without hesitation. Send the coordinates. The phone slid back into her pocket. Natalie turned away from the marker and started down the trail, boots finding purchase automatically, stride even and unhurried. There was no sense of being followed now, no shadow at her shoulder. Jonathan Pierce existed only in court records and sealed files, his reach finally reduced to 0. The mission never truly ends, it only changes shape. At the bottom of the trail, she didn't look back. If you want to follow Natalie's journey and stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel.